Hi guys, so today I want to look at and I guess share with you a fascinating prediction that I've been seeing trending pretty much since last year, and I've been meaning to make a video about it for so long and I'm finally doing it. So from the title you can probably tell that the prediction is that actually Poland will overtake the UK in terms of GDP. Now the prediction is that it will happen by 2030, so let's unpack why people are actually saying this. So firstly, let's define GDP, or GDP per capita. Now GDP stands for gross domestic product, and essentially GDP per capita is a measure of the total economic output of a country divided by the number of people who live there. So put really simply, it's essentially a measure of average income in the country. Now, actually, according to data from the World Bank, Poland is on track to surpass the UK in terms of GDP. Now, when we look at their data, in 2021, the UK GDP per capita was £36,000, while Poland's was just under £28,000. So there seems to be still a very clear gap between the two, right? But the growth rates of these two numbers tell a slightly different story. Between 2010 and 2021, the UK's GDP per capita grew by an average of just 0.5% annually, while Poland experienced a generally much higher rate of growth at 3.6%. So yeah, essentially, if these trends continue, Poland will surpass the UK in terms of GDP per capita by 2030. Now, Donald Tusk even suggested this might happen by 2025. I'm more willing to think it will be 2030, but it's still a pretty great prediction. Now, in a recent statement on the former Twitter platform, now called X, Tusk was celebrating 20 years of Poland in the EU, and he said, "As we celebrate 20 years in the EU, a fierce debate is taking place in Great Britain, caused by the World Bank's forecast that income per capita will be higher in Poland than in the UK in 2025. He added, "On the 25th anniversary, Poles will be wealthier than the British. It's better to be in the EU." I think that was a slight dig at Brexit. But the underlying point that Tusk is making is about Poland's success in the European Union. Over the past 2 decades, EU membership has actually brought Poland significant investment, access to trade markets, structural funds, etc. Meanwhile, the UK's much slower rate is actually causing concern for its leaders. Keir Starmer actually noted that the British people are falling behind while our European neighbours get richer in the East as well as in countries like France and Germany. He also warned about the potential for Britain to be overtaken by countries like Poland. Now, interestingly, this debate is happening against a backdrop of strengthening UK-Poland relations, because during a meeting that happened while Rishi Sunak was still Prime Minister, he actually praised Poland's commitment to defence spending. He noted that Poland was spending more on defence than any other ally in Europe. Poland's defence spending is actually more than twice that of major NATO members such as Germany, France, Italy and Spain. It's also significantly higher than the UK's planned 2.5% of GDP allocation by 2030, I mean. So what this means essentially is that Poland may soon, if not already from what I remember reading, possess the biggest and best land fighting capabilities in its army than all other European NATO members. Even France, which has a huge army, may find itself outnumbered by Poland. Let's look at the broader picture as well. Since the millennium, Poland's GDP per capita has more than doubled, while GDP per capita in England, France and Germany grew by only 15 to 24%. Now, living standards in places like Warsaw or Wrocław are already comparable to living standards in places like London, Berlin or Paris. And this is actually one big reason for this whole exodus of people back from places like England going back to Poland. Obviously, I'm one of them, and to be clear, I was never someone who planned to go back to Poland. I appreciate that people are skeptical of, people who go to make money in another country and then come back to their own, which I still think it's okay, because I still think they're contributing to the economy of their country whilst they're living in it, because they're still paying rent, they're still buying groceries, etc. But that's not the video for this. I wasn't one of those people. I didn't choose to move to a different country when I was a kid. And once I started, school and work and my career, it was never in my plans to move to Poland. If you had asked me literally from anytime until 2019, the end of 2019, because that's when I made the decision, anytime until then, I would have told you never ever am I going back to Poland. So I feel like I'm good to talk about this because it was never my intention to come back. And one reason for this whole exodus of people from Britain to Poland is the relatively low cost of living. Now, whilst inflation is still high, because it's, I think, about 15%, it hasn't negated the affordability. For example, rents in Wrocław are just 1/5 of rents in London. And a pint of beer is just over £1. Now, whilst we're on the subject of cities and Wrocław, the economic landscape has completely transformed. Whilst Poland's own investment in itself has been plentiful, there's actually been a lot of inward investment from other countries as well. A lot of big companies are shifting operations to Poland, and a big one that I can mention actually, which is why I said talking of Wrocław, is that Wrocław is actually a major base for the South Korean firm LG. And they're not the only ones. Recently, Poland actually overtook the US in producing lithium batteries for cars, which to me is crazy. I know a few people who actually work in Poland for overseas companies, and that is causing a lot of economic growth. The final thing to mention is education. Now, when I teach English, I often repeat this. I'm like, I have no idea how I would have coped in a Polish school, because I always said from the start, Polish schools are a lot tougher than my experience of British schools. Poland actually ranks among the top 5 or 6 OECD countries in reading, maths, and science, overtaking even countries like the UK. This obviously lays a very solid foundation for future growth, because people who have a much better education are more likely to achieve more things and go further in life, right? That's just how it is. So this will also contribute to future growth. So looking ahead, the question isn't just whether Poland will overtake the UK in terms of GDP, but actually what the other countries will do about it. For the UK, the slow growth has become a quite pressing issue, while Poland will still need to sustain its momentum to ensure that this happens. So what do you think? Do you think Poland will overtake the UK? Can they maintain this impressive momentum and growth? And how do you think the UK will respond to this challenge? Of course, all of this, this is assuming that nothing kicks off in terms of the world situation and everything, but we have to work with what we have. So the current situation is that nothing is happening. So if this maintains, then I think personally, Poland will overtake the UK, because comparing what life used to be like in the UK and what life is like now in Poland, I used to visit Poland a lot, even when I lived there and I didn't plan to move here. Things have changed, and this is why, going back to the whole moving from the UK, I never thought I would want to leave, and I still miss, if I could have the old England back, the England that I remember, that I'm homesick for, I would move back in a heartbeat. But things just changed, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like since Brexit, since COVID, everything just changed, and it just doesn't feel the same. Not to mention all the crime that's happening. And when I visited London in June, it was the first time in my whole life pretty much that I didn't feel safe walking alone at night. Whereas previously I could come back at 3 in the morning and walk on my own and feel safe. And obviously you had to be careful all the time, because generally as women we're careful, right? But all this violence, all these phone stealings and everything else, I don't know, it just doesn't feel the same. And I think so many more people are struggling, and yeah, people struggle in Poland too. This doesn't take into account that we are talking about GDP per capita. We're not talking about every single person. So you will still have rich and poor people in both countries. But overall, I think Poland has now become a pretty decent place to live. That's it from me. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.